Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
This week, top Senate lawmakers in transportation and housing share highlights of their budget agreements. A deal is reached on the education budget, and rulemaking for clean cars survives while refinery safety must wait. Stay tuned for this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. Lawmakers are steadily reaching agreements in the various budget areas that fund Minnesota's state government. This week, the transportation funding package came together, and I spoke with the Senate Transportation Chair Scott Newman. In reaching an agreement on the state's transportation needs for the next 2 years, you said on the Senate floor that it was a, quote, long, hard, difficult slog. Divided government makes reaching agreements a challenge, but overall, are you pleased with the final product?
The answer to your question is, first of all, I want to make sure that folks understand that it was difficult, it was a slog, but the chairman in the House, Representative Hornstein, and I worked together very well, and that is what our constituents expect of us. And despite the difficulties, the answer to your question is yes, I am pleased with the ultimate outcome of the bill. There are, it's a mixed bag for outstate Minnesota and in the metro area. It's a mixed bag in terms of policy, funding for various issues. So overall, the answer to your question is yes, I am pleased with the bill.
MnDrive is the system that was created to replace MnLARS, the original system developed to handle motor vehicle transactions, and it was riddled with problems. MnDrive has been in place for about 7 months, but one of several task forces created by this omnibus transportation bill will look into why it may end up costing more. Generally speaking, automation should increase efficiency and lower labor costs, right?
Absolutely, it should do exactly those two things. And one of the things that has been bothering me since MnDrive has been implemented, and MnDrive is doing very well, by the way, we have constantly had requests from DPS for more staffing and more appropriations, at the same time being requested by deputy registrars for fee increases that would be paid for by our consumers at up to 100% increase of their fees. Given the fact that we have spent, $100 million on this new system, I think that there should be some labor and money savings someplace, and it feels like we're bleeding out of both ends. So I have asked for this task force, and I'm looking forward to the answer that will give the legislature some recommendations as to how to handle this double request for funding. There has to be a saving someplace, and so far there hasn't been.
You also spoke of the ongoing continual struggle with the Minnesota Department of Transportation over how road construction projects are selected. Specifically, you mentioned Highway 212, about which constituents have been seeking changes for 61 years. How can the legislature have more input on the selection of road construction projects?
Well, just think about and use 212 as an example, because it's a perfect example. That road to be fixed and turned into a 4-lane so that it is safe for people, and it helps with our economy in terms of a good transportation system, has been on the 10-year plan for 60 years. There's something wrong if that is the case. MnDOT does not want to let go of the exclusive right to select projects. As a state agency, they are opposed to what they call earmarks. I say we in the legislature representing our constituents have a right of input as to how those projects are going to be selected. I'm looking for transparency in how MnDOT goes about their business, and I want input, direct input, so that I know that they listen to us rather than just give us lip service. I am being critical of MnDOT at this point, and I realize that. But this has been an ongoing discussion between MnDOT and I for now 5 years. And we are beginning to make some progress, but they really do not want to let go of the reins. They want to keep that control. And I think for instance, all of the projects that are in the bill are projects that senators and representatives created a bill and dropped, asking the legislature to get involved because it's projects that their constituents are asking for, and MnDOT was saying no. So that's why it is. And I think that we have to simply continue to push MnDOT for transparency in the selection process and direct, meaningful input by the legislature, and more importantly, the constituents, all of these highway coalition groups. They really think they're being listened to, and I don't think they are.
Another new task force will look into what you called impermissible spending from the Trunk Highway Fund, which brings in more than $2 billion a year through related taxes and federal aid. What exactly will the task force be looking for, and how can the legislature ensure that funds are properly spent?
The starting point for all of your listeners is the Constitution, which says all of this trunk highway money is to be spent for a, quote, highway purpose. And the leakage or the impermissible spending that I am talking about is where MnDOT, DPS, the judiciary, they are spending money out of the Trunk Highway Fund and HUTDF that haven't got anything to do with the highway purpose. Just a couple of quick examples, and we added, I think, 13 new prohibitions in this statute, in this bill. But just a couple of quick examples. The central office for MnDOT here in St. Paul, the rent for it is paid out of the Trunk Highway Fund. Parades and sponsorship paid out of the Trunk Highway Fund. Aeronautics paid out of the Trunk Highway Fund. Passenger rail paid out of the Trunk Highway Fund. What have they got to do with the highway purpose? And what it really amounts to is there's this huge pot of money. Over $2 billion a year comes in that the folks who drive cars pay for. Over $2 billion a year. It's too big of a pot of money for MnDOT and other agencies to resist. So they start pulling money out of it. And it's what I call leakage. And we can pay for a whole lot of our projects if we stop this leakage. I'm estimating something between $100 and $200 million a year. And what I'm asking this task force to look at is to give the legislature some recommendations as to what is properly a highway purpose to be paid out of this Trunk Highway Fund. And I am really looking forward to that report.
Several members spoke of a post-COVID world where perhaps people's habits have changed. They shop more online. They go into work less often. There is a third task force that will delve into how the state's transit needs may be shifting. Will there be a new normal or a back to normal? How might transit needs change?
My personal opinion is I think there's going to be a new normal. This task force that you have referred to is something that Chairman Hornstein and myself began to talk about during negotiations. So this was sort of a new idea. It didn't come through the regular legislative process. But I really think it's important because just think about what transpired in our world as a result of COVID. Businesses have changed their business modality. We've got people working from home now that I don't think businesses realized how popular that would be, number one, and the fact that we had the technology for them to do it. People have changed their shopping habits. How much stuff is purchased online versus going to a store? Our entertainment habits, I think, have changed. And so what we need to do is look at transit in the 21st century rather than continue to make transit programs based on the 20th century or before COVID. I think there's going to be a big change as a result of this task force, and the legislature and those who are interested in transit, as I am, we have to have some recommendations as to know where we should be heading. And I think it's going to change. I truly do.
There is so much in this bill. There's funding to put cameras on school buses. There are raises for state patrol, including new officers and body cams. There's a pilot program to provide same-day driver's licenses. What's one more nugget that you are pleased about?
Just a nugget.
Just one.
Because you're right. There's a lot in this bill. Just a nugget. Self-service kiosks. I think that's probably going to be the future, but we've got some self-service kiosks for folks who are able to drive up and, in effect, it's like a vending machine that can buy their license plate tabs. I have a hunch it's going to be pretty popular with people, and we're just getting started.
Senator Scott Newman, it is always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Shannon. Bye now.
The biggest roadblock in reaching a budget agreement for the housing portion of the state's next two-year budget was how to end the eviction moratorium, intended to keep people sheltered during the COVID-19 pandemic. An agreement has been reached, and I spoke with the chair of the Senate Housing Committee, Senator Rich Draheim. Not long ago, you were on the program to talk about the proposal to end the eviction moratorium, and soon that should become a reality. What should people who are behind on their rent due to the COVID-19 pandemic know about what the next steps are?
You know, the first step, anybody that is behind on rent should go to renthelpmn.org and see if they qualify, or you can call 211. But there is going to be an end to not paying rent, and you will owe that money after the state of emergency has ended. So important to go and get help. And our whole bill is designed to push people to that website and get the help that we have the resources, thanks to the federal government, to pay out rent.
So one problem that's come up is landlords who have had to deal with bad actors. Either they're able to pay their rent and they haven't, or they violated their leases in other ways, but landlords have not been able to remove them from the property. How is this handled in the off-ramp?
Well, there are some things in the executive order that do give an exemption for landlords to get rid of the very dangerous people. I don't know how that's been handled in the courts, but the way our off-ramp handles it is that after 15 days, if there's what we call a material breach or a material violation of the lease other than non-payment, so if you break your lease other than not paying, you could be evicted as soon as 15 days. That's the first phase of our bill.
Okay, and you mentioned the 15-day notice. Landlords will be required to give tenants before they can move forward with an eviction process. Is the idea to get people who are behind on their rent to go to Rent Help MN and apply for the aid? Because I understand then that there will be time for the process to work. And then for people who either make too much money or who are bad actors, it gives the landlord a way to get those people out of the property. Do I understand that right?
Yeah, so the first 15-day period, you don't have to give a notice. So if it's a material breach other than non-payment, you don't need a notice. Any eviction process for non-payment, then you have to give that 15-day notice. And the overpayment people, you can give them a notice to evict after 45 days, and then after 75 days, you can evict those people that make too much and should have been paying their rent. Because in the metro, if you made more than I think $83,000, you wouldn't qualify. So anybody under $83,000 in the metro would qualify for this program. So it's very generous.
And so at what point then is the moratorium completely ended? When does this off-ramp expire?
So the last phase is 105 days. So for 105 days, landlords have to give a notice that specifies, obviously what is owed, that the executive orders have ended and they could be evicted. And then encourage people to go to that website or call 211, Red Help MN, or the 211 phone number. But after 105 days, it ends. During that 105-day period, you have to apply and have a completed application. If you don't have a completed application, you could be evicted. But we do give some time, what I call in the tails, or at the end of that 105 days. So if someone has completed an application and the state just hasn't sent money to the landlord or the housing provider. They do have a few months yet to stay in the union. So that is one of the compromises that we made. That the state has been very slow. They've only paid out 5% of the applications so far for that helpmn.org website.
So the process is taking some time, but it is working.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, they're getting money out.
Good. Let's talk about some of the other elements of this omnibus housing bill. We've spoken several times about the problem of a lack of affordable housing in Minnesota, and it would seem, based on news reports with our extremely hot real estate market, the price of lumber and other supplies, that this problem is not going to go away anytime soon. What's in this bill to help with affordable housing?
Well, our Senate's been a pretty broken record on pushing for home ownership. That should be the end goal, is what can we do to get people into a home of their own. Not that we don't need rentals, we don't need to support rentals, but that is what a lot of our funding has gone to, was what we call workforce housing. And then we also did a lot for the manufactured home end of the spectrum. That is one of the most affordable sectors of housing, and the manufactured homes or the pre-engineered homes of today are totally different than what they were 20, 30 years ago. They're very quality controlled, very well built. We toured a factory about a year and a half ago, watched it being built. To be honest with you, they're better construction than some of the stick-built homes I've seen in my area.
So do you think manufactured homes is really the wave of the future? Last night I was on some websites looking at some of these, and they're, as you say, they're very nice and definitely more affordable. But I've also read that they depreciate in value significantly once purchased because they're considered property and not a home like stick-built, as you say. How do we deal with that as a state?
Well, we're trying to change that, and we had multiple bills in the Senate to try to do that. And the first step is, how do we title a pre-engineered home or a manufactured home? And that is one of the things in our bill. We also had language to encourage the state housing agency to come up with financing for that type of home. There is other states one other state that has a program up and running, and I know there's other states working on that. And I think we need to be a leader on that, especially in outstate Minnesota. It is the most affordable home ownership. It's cheaper than rent.
So the reform that you're talking about, if I understand it correctly, it will allow financing of a manufactured home as long as it's tied to real property in a co-op. So does that help someone build equity in a way that they wouldn't otherwise?
Yes, and I do think that depreciation issue in the past will go away if we do have the financing available.
Beginning on September, I'm sorry.
I just said for these type of homes.
Oh, okay. Beginning September 1st, students will benefit from a provision in this bill when it comes to leaving a rental before the end of the month. Can you talk a little bit about what students need to know about this new provision?
That was something that was brought forth by student organizations, and they were having to pay a full month's rent for maybe only being there 20 days. So we compromised on a calendar proration. So however many days in the month, the day would be prorated, so they can't be charged a full month.
I can recall from my own student days that there were always complaints about that. You would be required to leave your rental early to prepare for the next one, but you would have to pay for the whole thing. So that would not be allowed in Minnesota anymore.
Yep. That was one of the House provisions that we accepted.
Overall, are you satisfied with this bill? I know it's divided government. It's hard to find agreements. Are you satisfied?
Am I satisfied? I'm never satisfied. I think it's a good bill. It's a good step, but we left out a lot of the core problems with housing in Minnesota. We still have, Minneapolis is the worst city in the country for equity gap for home ownership, and we really didn't address that enough with this bill. I truly believe that home ownership is a pathway out of poverty, and if we can do a better job of getting more affordable homes out there, everybody benefits.
Senator Rich Draheim, I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Throughout this special session, lawmakers are frequently referencing Minnesota's divided government to explain the time it is taking to craft the state's next two-year budget. Reaching a compromise means that some proposals cross the finish line and others are left behind. The Environment Budget Agreement will allow the California Clean Car Emission Standards to be implemented in 2024.
Rather than trying to find a bipartisan solution of incentives or different ideas that have been thrown around, they've continued to opt instead for hyper-partisan, totalitarian rulemaking. Even when so many people spoke up and wrote comments to the PCA rulemaking process, even though 13 chambers of commerce recently stood up together to send a letter to the administration and ask that these rules be stopped or delayed. They've continued on.
California emission standards. It's not just cars, it's also the air. And I often say, well, I don't want to follow Los Angeles air standards. I think Minnesota could have figured out their own way. And then when we have those standards that get implemented ahead of where the market's driving, if the auto dealers are correct in saying that really the demand is only about 1% of their entire lot of cars, that people want electric cars, but with that standards, they have to carry 7%. Well, who's supposed to take care of those cars that are just sitting on the lot?
I carried the Clean Cars legislation about a decade ago. Federal law changed for a few years and made it almost unnecessary. But then about 4 years ago, it became necessary again, and so I'm glad the governor is taking executive order action to start the rulemaking to make it happen. We keep talking about how, oh, we're going to copy California law. No, we have two choices. We can copy the Washington, D.C. law or the California law, if you want to look at it that way. One of them is more aggressively working at trying to address climate. And I think when you look at the drought, folks are having more extreme weather of every kind. And the problems we have with climate, the idea that we're going to just bury our heads in the sand and maybe in time the economy will catch up and we'll make it happen. I've talked to a lot of people who want to buy electric cars and dealers don't carry them. In the states that pass the clean car standards, the dealers do carry them and they sell a lot more of them.
The Jobs and Economic Growth Agreement will not include a proposal that would require trained workers in petroleum refineries.
We want the blue-collar trades to know that we care about them, but that this wasn't the right bill. And so people didn't, frankly, want to take a vote that people would misuse and pretend like some of the people on my side of the aisle, frankly, don't care deeply about the blue-collar trades. And this is my own journey for the last 7 or 8 years, having visited the Carpenters Union site where they train people to do their trade with skill, and the 49ers and pipe fitters and electrical contractors and a number of folks like those, that we've begun to build an important relationship. But so why am I not supportive of this? And in that journey, what I found is over the last number of years, frankly, whether you're talking about timber or taconite mining or oil pipelines and refineries or copper nickel mining, there's a growing movement of people that want to stop those industries. And you have to ask, well, who in the world's doing that? And if you don't know that, you'll just have to figure that one out. But I realize that, frankly, if we're going to defend those industries and all those jobs, the business community and the trades communities have to start working better together. So this doesn't mean I'm trying to change right to work. We're never going to change right to work. We're going to leave it as it is. We're not trying to change prevailing wage. But the other thing that I would say is the goal is to drive those two groups together to fight for the same jobs, but it's not to get in the middle of those groups and solve their fight, but rather make them work through the process that we've had for a long time, collective bargaining, and if that doesn't work, you have the ability to strike, and I support that process. What I don't support is that I decide to get right in the middle of that fight and choose one side over the other on an issue that they're supposed to work out in between them.
I appreciate what Senator Gazelka said in terms of trying to have everybody work together to come to some sort of resolution. And in the ideal world, absolutely, that's what we always want. But what we see happen in legislation far too often is that you have a situation that people have pointed out for a variety of reasons ought to be changed, and then you have people who are trying to effect those changes, and the people who have the vested interest in the way things are currently in the status quo have zero incentive to meet in the middle. It's a gravitational problem. It is never going to get solved if there is not, because if the standard is we have to have peace in the valley, where's the incentive for these people to ever find that peace in the valley? That's where we have to step in sometimes.
And the E-12 education agreement will not include school choice, but will improve literacy and maintain pre-kindergarten funding.
Our literacy thing that we've been fighting for years, that the parents have been fighting for, is equity, literacy. The educators wanted it. It's been very successful in states around the country, especially Mississippi, so I see letters funding as equity. The biggest equity thing in the bill right now is teachers of color. We agreed on that. There is a great increase, great programs without a lot of policy strings attached to it. The Grow Your Own program has been working great for years in districts, so we left that policy alone. We tweaked the language a bit and let the districts do what they want and what they needed to do to get those teachers that they must have in those schools and where they need them. And for me, the biggest piece of equity that's not in the bill is the parent choice, because most of the people wanted parent choice, and that was the biggest equity piece for me in the bill.
We've been fighting for a meaningful increase to the formula because we know that's what our schools need. We know that schools across the state have been sending out layoff notices, and without this, there's just no excuse to have cuts, especially when our kids in schools and families have been dealing with the effects of the pandemic. A couple things that I am really pleased in particular, the voluntary pre-K, we did not lose those seats. Those were going to be taken away, and families rely on those. Low-income families rely on those, and so that was very important that we managed to preserve that.
Join us again next week as we delve into more topics affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Loehrke, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.